Hello, hello. Hi, hi, hi. And hey, hey. And welcome to Ken Michaels Radio. And here on this channel, as you know, it's all talking about the Beatles. And I have wonderful guests on my channel here. And my special guest this time out is one of my best friends ever. And I brought him on because this particular week, the third week of March, is it's an anniversary for me. It always marks when I started doing my first Beatles radio program, which was on a college radio station at the New York Institute of Technology in Old Westbury, Long Island, WNYT. It was the third week of March, and it actually is 40 years ago this week, as I speak, when I did my very first Beatles radio program, which in the very beginning was called the All Request Beatles Show, a very lame title if there ever was one. And then later on, when I was on XM radio with the same show, I gave it a much better title called Every Little Thing. And so it all started 40 years ago this week. And my friend here was a very big part of the show because on college radio on that station, I was on for a year and a half before I had my first really big job in radio on the air. And that was at WDHA in New Jersey, big rock station over there. And for a year of that year and a half, this guy was my co-host. His name is Ed Ryan, and we welcome him to
Thank
Ken
you very
Michaels
much.
Radio.
I love hearing your voice, Ken, and it's even nicer to see your face.
And he still listens to Every Little Thing on
I
a
do.
Long Island station.
I listen twice on Sundays. I time my day around it. At noon, you're on web radio classics,
Okay,
and then at 11 p.m. you're on our local radio station here on Long Island, 93.3 The Breeze. So I
that's
catch
right.
you twice on Sundays.
Well, our story, and we'll start our program here just to talk about how we met, is pretty interesting because for 3 years, I lived on Long Island most of my life until I moved to Connecticut in 2001. But I worked at a record store in Roosevelt Field in their mall there, which was the busiest mall on Long Island. And that store, I'm told, was the most successful record store on Long Island, the busiest one in terms of sales. That was Record World. And I
Good work.
worked there for 3 years. And in 1982, around the time when I started doing my Beatles radio program
It
on
was spring.
WNYT, what's
I
that?
started working. Yeah, spring of '82. I started working at Record World right after my second year of college. So right
Yeah,
around May, somewhere around there.
yeah. And
Sorry, go ahead.
we were pretty much, customer service people, just helping customers come in, find whatever records they wanted. And it was one of my favorite jobs. I mean, come on, I love music to death. And what could be better than working in a record store? Half my paycheck went to records there in the store because I had my special discount and I bought a lot
Discount.
of cutouts and all that. It was wonderful. It was heaven. And one day, Ed walks in. I never knew him before. And we hit it off. I discovered he was a huge Beatle fan and he knew the solo music. And it wasn't easy for me to find people that knew the solo music very well. And we kept talking about Beatles over and over again. And before I knew it, I said to him, I do a Beatles show locally here at this college radio station. Why don't you come up and just, you know, observe it
Answer
and
the
see?
phones.
Yes, and answer the phones, and you did. And then I said, well, why don't you talk a little bit on the air and just say who requested the song, who the song goes out to. And I got to tell you, in the very beginning, he said to me, no, 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 I don't want to be on the air. I'm too nervous. In 2 weeks or 3 weeks time, I couldn't shut him up.
That's true.
And we became a team for a full year. And I had such a blast working with him. And I got
Great.
so used to, the camaraderie between the two of us. I was pretty much the straight guy here, and Ed just said whatever he felt like on the air. It was
Yeah,
very free form,
for good or
very
bad.
loose. Yes. And we had tons of trivia. I invented lots of trivia and Beatle games. I got a local record store on Long Island to give away prizes. And you know, anybody who's been in radio knows that even if you give away the slightest little thing, no matter how cheap the prize may be, you got people calling up that want to win.
Sure.
And there was a store, the Long Island Record Collector, out of Hempstead. It's either Hempstead or
Mhm.
Uniondale.
Yeah, I think it
I
was
think it was
Hempstead.
Hempstead, and they gave away 45s for me, and I brought business to the store, and we had so much fun for
A lot
this
of fun.
full year. And I just loved working with him. And then after a year, he left the show, and I didn't even know if I would even continue doing radio programs on the Beatles, but I kept at it. Yes, there were
I
a lot of
visited you
tears
at
there.
your next two venues. I visited you on the one on Long Island. There was an AM
WGLI.
station. There you go. And then when you were in Jersey that you mentioned before, I think I visited you there too.
Yep,
Now
you were
I
on
love
the air
Beatles.
there. Yeah,
That was a great time. We were like you said, for a year. I was just on the other side of the glass. I was in the newsroom basically, and you were doing the spinning and doing all the talking, and I'd answer the phones and take the requests. And you could say, and every time you turned my microphone on, you heard the
oh yeah,
the news machine back
right,
then was always going. So every time you turned on my microphone, I sounded like I was in the newsroom giving you the latest details.
right.
And I had a blast. Big questions. We had a great audience. This was a radio station. For those who don't know, you couldn't get on the radio. You had to get it on the cable box back in the day.
That's
It was on
mainly true. Yeah,
Cablevision channel 14. It was the Swap and Shop listings, but the station was WNYT.
right. Well, the thing is, our station, we had an
I can let
FM
my cat out.
signal.
She's gonna complain the whole time. Here you go.
Okay.
You're out. There you
Um,
go. No,
our station, it's mainly true what you just said there. We did have an FM signal, but it didn't go much further than the campus at New York Tech. And we did develop a following. Our signal was heard only on cable television, and it was even in mono.
oh
You
wow.
know, and we still had devoted people calling up, and my show featured Beatles, solo Beatles, anything Beatle related, and
Yeah.
a lot of trivia. Later on, when I took the show to the New Jersey station, I started to add news every single week. I had thematic sets that I developed. I invited people to do for interviews on the air live. Um, yeah, and it
You had
became
some of the
more and more.
same games that some of the
Yeah,
games that you still play now. Scrambled eggs. I remember you definitely did back then. And the ending one where you play two songs that had similar endings, and you had to say
that's
what
the
they
way.
were.
No, the end, the game called the end is just playing the very end of a Beatles song or solo Beatles song and identifying it. You might be thinking about the double fantasy game. The
Oh,
double
okay.
fantasy game is when you play two clips, one's Beatles or solo Beatles, the other is
And the others,
another artist, but they're
it
similar.
sounds similar. Yeah, I
And you
remember
see
that.
how the Beatles influenced another artist. So,
Yeah.
but if you follow not only my syndicated show, Every Little Thing, and the live broadcasts I've done since the New Jersey Rock Station, and my website, kenmichaelsradio.com. There's Beatles trivia there every single week. It's just a continuation of what I started doing 40 years ago with many of the same games
Yeah.
and developing new ones. So, yeah,
It
but
was fun then. It's fun still today. We
it's
had.
just amazing.
Do you remember the most amount of requests we got in one night?
Didn't we get something like 100 or 200?
200. 200 requests in a single 3-hour program. It was very popular. It was great. It was a great time.
I know. There was nothing else like it. And somehow we managed to get quite an audience, not only for my show, but the other specialty programs that were on WNYT. A lot of young people called up. We had a show, just mentioned for a few seconds, called Battle of the Towns. And all we did was play a song, and you had to call up and name the song. And if you did, you won a point for your town, not even for yourself. So if it was like, oh, Freeport's in the lead right now, people called up for something as silly as that, but it was a lot of fun.
Speaking of towns, now you mentioned that we met 40 years ago. We became fast friends, and then we became working buddies.
Yeah.
But failed to mention that we found out we lived like 3 blocks away from
Yeah.
each other. been
and I
walking
never,
distance our entire lives and never knew it.
and we went to the same high school, but you were 2 years behind me. So,
Right. And I didn't start till, oh, my high school career is a whole sordid affair. I don't understand. I started out at one school, ended up another, whatever. Anyway, but I didn't get to meet you then.
okay.
But I know you now. So let's talk Beatles.
Yeah, but before we do, just want to let everybody know that Ed, for the last 40 plus years, has been living his life as a musician. That's all he does. He performs music, he writes music, he's always doing gigs, and thankfully it's picking up again after COVID. He does his own original songs, he does classic rock, he's in a band that played both Tom Petty and Fleetwood Mac music. He does Irish music, especially around St. Patrick's Day. He kind of does it all. And you've even done stand-up comedy.
I did for a dozen years. I, I just keep moving on. I get through with one thing, go, all right, let's try something else.
Yep. And you're so really, and I'm not saying this because you're my friend, you're multi-talented. And whenever I've seen you perform, it's so impressive. You have a great singing voice. And I love all the stuff that you've written. And you've been a part of, and we'll get to Fab Five in just a moment. There is a concert that, if you followed my podcast shows, I've raved about for many years, called the Concert for Bangladesh Revisited. And this is all done by a group from Long Island, Wondrous Stories. They took their name from the Yes song. But this band normally plays anything they want to, progressive rock, like Yes, lots of Beatles, top 40 music, you name it. They're very versatile.
A lot of
But
Genesis, ELO,
yeah, and once a year,
ELO, ELP. I'm sorry, ELP.
I'm sure they do. There's nothing they really can do,
Right,
can't
correct.
do. I'm sorry,
Right.
but yeah, but once a year for several years, and COVID stopped this, but I'm sure
Yeah.
it will resume again. They recreate the concert for Bangladesh, and they do virtually every single song from the concert except the Ravi Shankar piece, but they substitute that with other stuff that's Indian music. And Ed does the Leon Russell bit, the whole medley with Jumpin'
Yeah.
Jack Flash and Youngblood. So every single song, the Bob Dylan stuff, Ringo, Billy Preston, and all of George's stuff, it's all done live. And then they do more Beatle music. It's like a 3.5 hour show. It's
Usually
tremendous.
have some special guests on, and like we've had Denny Lane a couple of times. We've Steve Holly a lot of times. Gene Cook from the Rascals.
Cornish.
I'm sorry, Gene Cook, Gene
That's
Cornish,
right.
correct. Gene Cornish from the Rascals, and the Soul Survivors when they were, I think one of them passed away. Just and Vanilla Fudge, just different art acts to add to the concert for Bangladesh to make it longer. Take George's concept and then build on it. Like now we've got special guests here today.
Right.
So, and it was always a blast. It's a great time. We got postponed 2 or 3 times because of COVID, and it just had to be canceled. So no word on when the next one will be.
But you can be sure that I'll be plugging it on my podcast, and probably here too, and get some of the other musicians who have actually been on my podcast, like John Montagna, for
John
example.
Montagna, John
Yeah.
Mojave.
Yep.
Who else have you might have
I'll
had?
get the other ones. I'll get just about everybody. Believe me,
sure
I'll work them in.
Well, hey, you
But
can get Tommy Williams. He not only is he in Wondrous Stories, but he used to work with us at Record World as well.
that's right. Yeah, he's a maestro. He is like the music director for that
Yeah.
show, and he plays a lot of different instruments and can sing really well. He's another great talent.
He's
But
one of those savant geniuses.
yeah, and just wanted to point out that you mentioned Denny Lane. You did perform with him on stage, and you sang "Let Me Roll It." And while you're doing this, you're looking at Denny, and there's a look on your face like, I can't believe I'm doing this.
Well, I couldn't. It's one of the thrills of my life. It was not just the fact that it was Steve Holly was on drums. That was a thrill.
Yeah.
The first 2 times. It's always a thrill because first of all, he's the sweetest guy
Yep.
in the world. No wonder he works with everybody so well because he's just so generous and giving. But when they brought in Denny Lane, yeah, I was, tongue-tied and nervous because like I said to him, it's not often you get to play with someone who used to be on your wall. I had
Yep.
all the posters, and I'd see him every day. And now he's like next to me on stage, and it was a real thrill. I got to play with him twice at a Bangladesh show, and then we also did a John Lennon tribute in December, which was half Magical Mystery Tour and half John Lennon show. However that worked, it was just one. Mark Hudson was on the show, and again Gene Cornish and Gary Von Syock,
From
if that's how you
Elephant's
pronounce it.
memory.
Yeah, and Denny and Steve Holly, and I have my acoustic guitar signed by all five of them. Now,
Oh, nice.
it was supposed to be my camping guitar, but now I can't bring it camping anymore because it's got all these and Mark Hudson actually drew a self-portrait of himself, the cartoon about it, and I looked at it and immediately I said, Mark, did you draw the cover for Ringo Rama? Because I didn't know that. And he went, yes, I did. I recognized the style right away. So I have an original artwork on my guitar as well.
Very
From that.
nice.
Yeah, Denny Lane, I looked at with stars in my eyes while we were on stage. Yes.
Well, just so everyone knows, I consider it like a little miracle that Ed and I met, considering the fact that he lives so close to me and I never knew it. And we've been good friends ever since, 40 years now.
Yep.
And so why don't we get to our Fab Five show?
Why not? Let's go at it.
This is when I asked my guests to name 5 albums, 1 Beatles, 1 from each solo Beatle, that are the albums that you prefer to listen to at the moment for whatever the reason, and we'll explore the reason for each one of them. So we're going to start this time with John Lennon.
Okay. Now, a lot of these I chose because, like what you had said, when I'm feeling in the moment or these days,
Right.
because you go through your phases. Obviously, I love every Beatle album and just about every Beatles solo album. Just like people say, who's your favorite Beatle? It changes every day, for the most part. Like
Okay.
one day I'm in love with this one, the next day, but so I love them all equally. So having said that, my go-to John Lennon albums are always Mind Games and Walls and Bridges, first and foremost. I go to the music that makes me happy,
Right.
puts me in a good place. I think Walls and Bridges is his best produced album, and I think it's wonderful from top to beginning to end. But there's something about Mind Games that really puts me in a warm place, and that's the one that I would choose to listen to at this given moment. I would put on Mind Games. I love all the songs on it. I think, again, if the production was as clean as it is on Walls and Bridges, I think Mind Games would be heralded as a better album. But for me, it hits the sweet spot. And I just like all the songs. I like where it puts me in my head. It's very relaxing. That's a start.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, Mind Games to me is the most underrated of all of John's albums. And I love every single song on there. Only People is probably my least favorite because it does sound kind of like he's trying to have a hit record here. But I still love the song.
I could understand that. Only People, I do like Only People. The one that rubs me a little bit is Intuition for some reason. I always think Intuition was a little bit on the hokey side, but other than that, I enjoy it. But I think Only People speaks more to me than Intuition. I love all the songs. I can't even decide if I like side 1 better than side 2 because there's so many great things on side 2, and yet side 1 has the greatest rock and roll guitar solo this side of Carlos Santana, and that's Alcimo Sena, however you want to pronounce that.
Right.
The David Spinoza guitar solo on that piece of work, it makes my heart soar. SOAR, by the way, not SORE.
Yeah, I interviewed David many years back in the 80s, and he told me that was one take. That guitar solo.
Like My Love.
Yeah, that's true.
I didn't know that the David Spinoza solo was one take. It's just brilliant. I listened to when I've had it on in years gone by, and it was playing in the car on one of my tapes, and people were in the car. I'd have to make everyone be quiet, not for the whole song, but the solo's coming. You got to be quiet. It just gets me. It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
And I feel that way about a lot of the album. The sweetness of You Are Here. It's just it's like waves, not big waves, but small waves lapping at you on the shore, just
Right.
calming, serene. That's what I like about the album.
Yeah, well, I agree with you totally there. Song for song, it's so consistently strong. And, I love every single song on the album. And, as far as ballads go, Out the Blue is one of the
Out the
best of
Blues,
his solo career, as is I Know I Know.
uh, back to back, aren't they? Or they think they're one after the other on the record, or maybe there's something in between.
No,
I haven't looked at the track listing in a while, but they're on. But they're both on side two.
yeah,
Uh,
okay.
and great stuff. Even Mind Games, the song sets the tone for the album because that uh, that phrase, that musical phrase
Hmm.
that just keeps repeating and repeating and repeating. You'd think you'd get tired of it, but you don't. It drives the song, and the fact that it sounds like a bell every time. It's a guitar lick and something else. I haven't listened to it in a couple of days, but I don't know,
Hmm.
couple of days, couple of weeks. It's not just guitar. It's like guitar and keyboard, and it sounds like ringing a bell, and it just like I say, you'd think you'd get sick of it, but you don't. Toward the end, as it's fading out, you're like, no, a little more, a little longer.
And it's a marvelously produced song too. It
Yes.
does have sort of a Phil Spector feel to it.
Hmm.
I love the orchestration on there, you know.
Hmm.
And I could say this all the time about John, incredible vocals all
Oh yeah,
throughout.
oh yeah. The whole album has great vocals. Tight as, I mean, that's a nice boogie, and I like
Hmm.
the way he says boogie on it.
And Meat
Uh,
City. I mean, what a rocker. Yeah.
Meat City I had because I didn't get that album until many years after it was released. I had to catch up on a lot of stuff. When that came out, I was like 11, so I was still catching up on Beatle albums I didn't have. So I
Mm,
didn't get all the solo stuff at the time. I think I opted for the Ringo album. I had a choice at the time, Ringo or Mind Games, and Ringo's album was much more popular, and I had heard it, so I sunk my teeth into that one at that time. But I did have the Mind Games single when it came out.
right.
And Beat City was on the second side. I thought it was just a crazy song. It's just what it's stopping now, and the rhythms. John is always famous for not sticking to 4/4 all the time, just
Right.
throwing an oddly timed phrase in the middle of anything. Um, but that one like startled me.
Yeah. It's I would definitely, anyone who's not familiar with Mind Games, check it out because
Yeah,
it's so sad that his life was cut short at the age of 40. And, to his credit, he felt the last 5 years of his life prior to recording Double Fantasy, he wanted to spend with Yoko and Sean. We have a fairly small catalog, unfortunately, but there is a lot more to John Lennon's solo catalog than Plastic Ono Band, Imagine, and Double Fantasy. And
yeah.
the stuff that was in between, explore that because there's a lot of great moments. And I want to ask you, since you just mentioned it, because I get a number of people telling me that while they love Mind Games, the album, they don't like the production. What is it about the production on that album? I've never had a problem with it.
It's not as sharp, it's not as crisp or
Hmm.
clean, and these are the words that come to mind. It's got a almost like a dampering on it, like a dullness to the whole thing that just could be where it doesn't bring out each individual instrument as it might have on a differently produced album. I don't know
Okay.
if that's making sense to you. It's just, yeah, it's not as crisp or clean. Those are the only words that keep coming out. Like a nice head of lettuce. That's what it should.
Now I've always liked the way that of the original mix, and then there was a remixed version of the album that came out in the 2000s, which I liked a lot. Um, a little bit of instrumentation that I hadn't heard before, especially in the title track, some keyboard stuff. But I've never had a problem with the production. Yeah, the production on Walls and Bridges is so full and clear.
That's
And
what I'm
yeah,
talking about. Yeah.
I understand what you're saying about Walls and Bridges, but I still don't have that big a problem with the production of my games. If that's just me, you know.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting John Lennon songs, so you can't have a big problem with it. You
Yeah,
know, if this is the
this-
way it's being presented to me, then that's the way I'll take it.
yeah.
But but it was just something. I don't mean to use the word dull as in boring. It's
Mhm.
not, but there's something dulling in comparison to Walls and Bridges. That has an air about it in Mind Games. Like you said, the title track is well produced, and I think if all the songs were as bright as that one, it might have been different.
Hmm. Okay.
Just an opinion. I'm opining.
That's what this show is all about. This is all about opinions that we're expressing here. Let's move on to Ringo.
Okie dokie. Ringo. All right. I mentioned the Ringo album. Of course, I've got a big soft spot in my heart for that. That's and it's either that or, like you said, what are you going to listen to these days? My other go-to might be, of the latest stuff, Choose Love. I happen to love that album very much. I remember
Okay.
listening to it a lot while working on the computer. I don't know how many years ago it was, but I kept going back to Choose Love. I really enjoy that album a lot. But if I may go off the regular albums, I think right now what I would go to, just for the pure joy and the goofiness, I don't mean to say the word goofiness, would be Starstruck, the Best of Ringo Volume 2.
Okay.
I know it's a collection, and if you don't allow it, then I'll probably go back to Choose Love or Ringo. I couldn't decide. But there's something about Starstruck that puts me in a good mood, because they're, like I say, it's a best of. It's not a greatest hits.
Mhm.
It's a best of, and it's mostly collected from albums that I didn't really listen to that much because I didn't think that much of them at the time, you know?
Right.
So to have these gems that I consider all in one collection, when I got that Starstruck Volume 2, it seemed like a different side of Ringo to me, presented all at once, you know, without all what I would call, in my opinion, some of the boring stuff and overproduced disco type of stuff that got thrown into some of his later 70s albums. I don't think it was by his choice, by whoever was producing. But the songs on Starstruck strike me.
Okay.
I think they put me in a good mood, and makes me happy, that album.
Well, Starstruck is pretty interesting because, well, Ringo's hits really stopped happening after A
Right.
Dose of Rock and Roll, even though Rack My Brain made the top 40 in 1981. But what you're basically getting on Starstruck are a lot of album cuts or maybe some singles that didn't do well post Apple or Capitol. So it's going deep into Ringo's
Yeah.
catalog at the time. So it's interesting in that it's not the the songs that everybody knows from
No,
1971 through 75. So it's the latter stuff prior to when he did Time Takes Time.
she's not going to be quiet until she gets some airtime. Here we go.
That's
That's
one
great.
cool cat.
It's one cool cat. Now she'll run away. Yeah, something about it that tickles me. Like songs like "Hopeless." I just
Hmm.
It just makes me happy. Without, and no offense to old wave, but without having listened to that whole album, just getting the tracks I liked from it.
Uh,
Um, I don't know if you count it as an album, but I thought it was a really nice collection um, of non-hits, you know. Uh, and it makes me happy and puts me in a good place. But so does Choose Love, and so does Ringo. Ringo will always be a special place in your heart, right? That whole album, from
mhm.
beginning to end, is just basically flawless. And even if it's flawed a little bit, it brings back great memories, because everybody had that album. So that's
Mm.
like a childhood memory, puts you back in places. But for me, if I was to listen to something today, I would put on Starstruck.
Okay. I should have told you that I wasn't including greatest hits
All right,
or compilations, but still,
that's right.
it's worth bringing up
It is,
because
because
it's a
it's
worthwhile collection.
it is. I think so. You know, but and so is Choose Love. Choose Love, I think, is my favorite of the Mark Hudson produced albums, and the Mark Hudson produced Ringo albums are some of my favorite Ringo albums. And something about Choose Love, I know it doesn't have the hits from Vertical Man, the more popular songs, but I think they're all winners, and it just again puts me in a good place. Ringo's singing well, he's drumming well. You get a Chrissy Hind duet rather.
Sure.
Um, the first two songs out of the gate, Give Me Back the Beat, Fading In, Fading Out, opposite order, but and my favorite song on the album is track 3, Oh My Lord. For Ringo to do a
Mhm.
prayer song
Right.
and to have it effectively and not come off as hokey or goofy, That's really a standout track for me in his whole career. For me, I
Mhm.
think that's one of his greatest songs. And even the ending with is it the beginning and the ending where it's got that old timey sound, where it sounds like he's coming from a radio. Might be at the end
I
only.
think it's towards the end. Yeah.
Oh,
Wait, I'm
yeah, I like that too. I know I
trying to
haven't listened
remember,
to
but I like the song and it's, yep. Uh-huh.
yeah, I like it. I think that, and it shows George's influence on him. And it's not like, well, George did it, so I'm going to do it. You can believe that Ringo believes it. Like this is a real prayer
Right.
from him to a real higher power.
Let me ask you something that I occasionally bring up in my podcast shows. Do you like Ringo more? Do you think his albums are stronger when he works with someone like Mark Hudson and also has like a band behind him like the Roundheads? Even though, from Vertical Man on, you had different lineups on the songs, but you still had some of the same core people that made up the Roundheads who also wrote songs with Ringo. It's more of a tight unit that way. Whereas all the albums that followed, every song was a collaboration with someone else. And in many cases, a different group of musicians. You know,
You're talking
there,
about from like 2012 on and all that.
right.
2012,
Yeah.
why not? And
Yeah.
Liverpool 8. Who did Liverpool 8? Was that Mark
It
Hudson or
started
no?
with Mark Hudson and then Dave Stewart took it over.
Because that's like the last great, not last. I don't, he's always putting out good quality stuff. That I
Right.
got to say about Ringo's latest albums. Always good quality stuff. That the last EP, the first of the two-part EP, had a really nice song about peace. Not enough love in the world.
Right.
Not enough love in the world. That's a great song. That's
Yeah.
a wonderful song. But other than that, the last couple albums are just not. They're nice. They're pleasant. But the ones that Mark Hudson produced, and I'm going to include Liverpool 8 with that because that was a really very good album with a lot of great production. There's just something that's very exciting. There's excitement about the tracks and clever words and all that kind of stuff. I do think they're just a notch above the other stuff. If I had to rank groupings of, you've got, of course, your classic opening albums up until side one of Rotogravure. And then you take side two of Rotogravure and go through Old Wave, and that's a collection of phase two, I would call. Phase three is Time Takes Time up to Liverpool 8, and then what he's been doing lately, all the self-produced stuff. And to rank those, I would say the early stuff, number one, then the Mark Hudson stuff, number two, then his self-produced, number three, and then that late 70s stuff where he kind of got lost in other people's worlds. I think he was drinking too much and not really taking care of his own. He wasn't even playing drums that much on. It was more like, he was a star at that point, not as much a musical artist, where he had to get back to being that. You understand?
Interesting. I understand what you're saying. We had a debate about this recently on Talk More Talk, one of my podcast shows, and to me, there's no doubt that the Ringo album itself is classic, and I like Goodnight Vienna, but I didn't see that big a difference in the quality of the late 70s stuff to Goodnight Vienna.
Yeah,
Goodnight Vienna, I like a lot of songs on there,
but not
but
all of it. Yeah,
yeah, and side one of Ringo's Rotogravure is very good.
it
But
is very.
what you were saying about disco, I think that's quite overdone because Ringo the Fourth, which is an album that a lot of people say is a disco album, he had Drowning in the Sea of Love, and I don't really consider the other songs on there to be disco. Maybe a few danceable
Yeah, well,
songs, like
disco
like
may be a harsh phrase. I think what people mean when they say disco, that it was a lot of strings, a lot of hi hat. Doesn't have to necessarily be disco. It just had that popped, glossed over flourish that kind of symbolized the disco era at the time, even if it wasn't disco music. You know what I mean?
okay, yeah, good point. But he also was doing a lot more writing then with Vinnie Poncia. So I would say that in some ways he took his music seriously in that direction. But whether or not you think he put the effort in behind the songs, I still think so many of the songs he wrote with Vinnie were very strong. So especially on Ringo's Rotogravure, which is an album that Ringo the Fourth which is an album that a lot of people point to as being like one of the worst solo Beatle albums. But
Right.
I still think
And see,
there's a lot of good material on there.
that's my memory of it. The thing is, I've never gone back to those albums. I don't think I even have them on CD. So I've never gone back to those albums since vinyl, and I don't have great memories of them. But I did look up in preparing for this, just to look up what albums were released. I looked at the tracking of Bad Boy, and that looked like a pretty good album. I think I would, if I was to go back and listen to any of those again with fresh ears, I would listen to Bad Boy, just because I
Okay.
looked at the track. Oh, I know some of them. Pretty good. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, like I always say, every solo Beatle album has worthwhile material on it.
Mhm.
So I don't
Even
consider any, even
the
what.
worst album of any of that, whatever you would consider to be the worst album of each of them, has at least one or two very good songs on
Mhm. I would say more than that, but that's me.
it. Maybe. Well, I I can only, never mind. I don't want to get into arguments with you.
It'll be like the old days. Come on.
Yeah, well, I left in the old days. No, no, I didn't. I got fired, folks. But
Yes, you did, but we won't get into that.
no, we
Will
won't.
we? Okay. Um,
A little too freewheeling I was.
yes, you were. Um, but I would never fire you, so you don't have to
No,
worry about that here.
no.
All right,
You
let's
could
do a
fire
beat.
another question at me.
How about a Beatles album? What would be your go-to Beatles album today?
Okay. Okay. I had options on this one too, because there's something I really love about the early Capitol albums. And most specifically, if I wanted to capture that excitement and joy of Beatlemania, the Beatles' second album
Hmm,
is
Okay.
from start to finish, one rocker after another. And I know it wasn't a proper album because it's singles and B-sides and stuff from With the Beatles that got left off of Meet the Beatles. And by the way, Meet the Beatles would be another go-to one.
Right.
But I think for some reason I'm drawn to the Beatles' second album because of the excitement of it. It really captures the early Beatlemania before they came to the States. All these songs were recorded, and there's just such excitement in every track. You put on side two, it opens with Long Tall Sally, one of the most exciting performances ever put to record, and then ends the side with She Loves You. And what do you do after that?
Mm.
You got to put it on again. You're starting with Roll Over Beethoven. I mean, it's just that album really gets you excited. So that would be a great nostalgic album for me to put on. But if we were going away, if you were saying Desert Island or something, or choosing a proper album, then I would have to go for Rubber Soul, because that just it puts me in a very, very calming mood. I have great memories about when I got the album, even though we had a different version in the States.
Right.
I would definitely put on the CD version that they intended, because it's got the extra songs. And it's got to get extra George song, and it's got Nowhere Man. So those are important to keep in. But that album from top to bottom is a wave of joy, and just puts you in a great place. It's side two is very soothing in spots, Girl and In My Life, and even I'm Looking Through You. Even though it's a breakup song, there's just something very soothing about it and calming in the vocals and the delivery. I love that album. I'm a little leaning toward it because I spent one of the greatest weeks of my life when I was like 9 years old, and I got to stay with my grandparents by myself. I'm one of 8 kids, so it was nice to have just the grandparents to myself for 1 week. They lived in Brooklyn, and I had all the attention, of course, because there was no one else around, and of course they were going to get me a gift, and I liked albums, so I was going to get a Beatles album, and my grandmother wanted to buy me Let It Be because it was in the cutout bin. But I knew it was in the cutout bin because I just received 2 copies of it for Christmas. So this was now, like spring, late spring, early summer. So I didn't want Let It Be, even though she tried it because it was cheaper. But she let me have Rubber Soul, and I didn't really know any of the songs on it except for maybe what I'd heard on the Beatles cartoons. And of course, and Michelle was played on the radio. But man, I put that album on, and just in that wonderful setting where you're at peace with yourself, you're a 9-year-old kid having the time of his life, reading comic books and eating like a king. To have that album to sink your teeth in Oh man, brings me right back to that safe place.
Mhm.
And it's a wonderful album. So
So at that time when you were 9, this was the American one.
yeah, so
Okay.
it started with I've just seen a face, which really, and then Norwegian Wood. So it put you in an acoustic mood already. So it
Right.
seemed like an acoustic album, especially even on side two when it opens with It's Only Love. It's got a heavy acoustic sound underneath that electric guitar intro. And a lot of side two is acoustic, and Michelle is acoustic. So it really seemed like a heavy acoustic guitar album. You
Mhm.
put it back to the way they planned it, and it wasn't so much that it's even handed. It's half electric, half acoustic. But the way the American version came out, and pop, folk music was still popular at the time. I'm talking about 1970, uh, uh, 72,
A
71. Yeah,
lot, a
19.
lot of that stuff in the early 70s was all, wouldn't say
Yeah,
all, James Taylor,
yeah,
that
very
whole
popular.
period. Yeah.
So that album really hit home with me at that time, and it's definitely always a go-to album.
Okay. So how much of your go-to albums do you rely on, memories of the past as opposed to just the music, what you feel like hearing?
Interesting. I think a lot of it, you can't help but embed your memories into a lot of the music, because that's what it triggers. Music triggers memories. You'll see something from your past that you forgot about if it gets triggered by the right song. Like right now, I can see the dials on my grandparents' old console, the big record player that was a piece of furniture, that you had to pull
Uh,
down, and I could see all the big buttons on it, and I've forgotten all about that. But now that we're talking about it, that's what music does. Now I'm not even hearing the music, but just talking about the album. Um, I see what you're saying. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think you can help but bring back memories. You'd be a robot if you had to, if you could,
you wouldn't be
if you
human.
yeah,
But
yeah,
so,
exactly.
but
You
there
couldn't
are
help.
times, at least in my case, when I listen to music purely for the love of the songs
Hmm.
without even having memories attached to them. Whether you like the melodies, whether you like the vocals on the song or the arrangement. There's so many reasons to love a particular
Sure.
song or an album. And yeah, if you have strong memories attached to it that you're quite fond of, that only makes you love the album even more. But, there's plenty of times when I'll just choose a particular album that I feel like listening to and has nothing to do with the time when it first came out,
No, no, correct.
yeah.
Uh, I understand what you're saying. No, I didn't pick it just because of that. I just think it's a great, solid album. It's something I'd be in the mood to listen to these days.
Mm,
Um, the White Album, I think I've listened to a couple of times in the past couple of years, all the way through after since the remakes or whatever remixes. And I played it a lot on one of the programs. So sometimes you get burnt out on certain things. You go back to it later.
mhm.
So right now it would be Rubber Soul for me, I think. And you know what? There's not a Beatle album that I own that I don't have a memory attached to, because I always remember, like you bought so many albums working at Record World, you maybe you don't have an emotional attachment to each one, but there
Right.
was only a certain amount of Beatle albums that come into your life, or solo Beatles, and you usually got them as gifts, or you went out special to get it on purpose. So there's always some sort of memory attached to it. And the first time listening to it, and who can help but have flashbacks to the artwork that
Mm,
that you looked at while listening to the record. There were no videos. You're just looking at this front and back. If you're lucky, there'd be a sleeve.
mhm.
We were talking about John's albums before. I think Mind Games might have been more into the common memory of people if it had better artwork than just the same picture, basically front and back, with no real close up of John. Whereas Walls and Bridges had booklet things you could flip over. You could play with the
Mm,
album.
true.
So there was a lot more images to go with it to make it a more memorable experience.
And these drawings that John made from his childhood,
Right.
made it even more special.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right. How about let's do Paul next.
Paul's a tough one, as you know, because he's got so many
I
albums.
know.
Um, it's easy to overlook, but we'll just go off the top of the head. The go-to albums for me, usually right away, is Red Rose Speedway. Is probably the top of my. Put that on. Always makes me happy, especially the CD version where you get those 3 bonus tracks.
Okay.
because I love I Lie Around and My Woman Love, Little Woman Love, and whatever the third one is, Country Dreamer.
Country Dreamers on there. Yeah. Uh, The Mess is on there.
Oh, The Mess. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, right. Well, The Mess I have a great memory of too because I had the 45 of My Love. But I like that album all the way through. Again, it puts me in a good place. Some of the songs sound a little bit like they weren't finished or outtakes of a certain thing, like Get on the Right Thing. He kind of flubs. It almost seems like a flub where this is where the chorus should be. But he goes, he goes, that's the way it came out. It's like, yeah, all right, but you could have fixed it. This is the final product. We're hearing you.
Okay.
But there's nothing I don't like on that album. There's not a song on it that I go, skip that.
Right.
And if it's not that, see, I always have another go-to. London Town leaves me the same way. It's another album that really puts me in a wonderful place. I love every song on London Town, with the exception of Morse Moose and the Grey Goose. That just kind of, I mean, it's a nice piece. It's a nice little audio play, but after this, what I think is a brilliant album, especially side one, is practically flawless. Side two has its ups and downs because, again, some of the songs sound incomplete, like Name and Address. Don't just
the way
throw
that
the
it ends
ending
too.
away.
Yeah.
It's like you have this great song. Why are you just throwing it away? Like, that's enough of that. What else we got? And the fact that 3 songs in a row are in the same key. And it always would. You could have staggered them a little bit, even though Name and Address is a great song. Deliver Your Children. That's one of the best songs of ever. First of all, it's the best Denny Lane and Paul song for me, even over Mull of Kintyre. I think that's a brilliant song. The Deliver Your Children. I've been doing that forever. But I think it's butted up against Famous Groupies. We just hit and miss. And Name and Address, and they're all in the same key. They're all in the key of A or A minor. So to have one follow the other, I always thought was a little weird. Like, are you trying to make a medley, like a side 2 of Abbey Road with this? Because they don't really connect. Could have been a little split up there. But having said that, I think London Town is a great album. That is a go-to album for me. Again, all these things are albums that put me in a good place. That's why I listen to music. I can be challenged when I want to be challenged, but you're talking about what would you put on to relax, basically. What would you put on to for pleasure? London Town, great album. Side one, like I said, I don't think there's any song that should be taken off side one. And some people have a problem with Girlfriend. I don't. I think his falsetto is really nice on Girlfriend, and I think it's a really good pop song. And I've had enough. Cafe on the Left Bank is
one of my favorites.
It's a great rocker that is so overlooked. And the song London Town itself, I think, is as quirky. It's as quirky as Band on the Run is, in that it has different parts to it. It's just not as strong a rocker because I guess some of the arrangement, the orchestral arrangement perhaps in it made it a little softer on the edge. But I still think London Town is a wonderful piece. I've tried to play it, sit down and play it as a song. Maybe it doesn't work as a solo artist, but as a recorded piece to listen to what they did, it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. It paints different pictures, and that's what you want out of music. That's what you want out of recordings. There's one thing to write a song like Yesterday, where you can sit there and play it. Anyone could play it. It's beautiful. And it's another thing to make a recording of it the way they did with the strings and just the guitar. Now that's a recording, and that's how I speak about London Town as a song. That's a recording,
Okay.
Nice.
All right.
The other one, and Carrying.
I'm Carrying. Nice.
I even love the instrumentals, Cufflink and
Backwards Traveler going into it.
Traveler. Yeah. You can't go wrong with London Town or Red Rose Speedway. Did you know I didn't pick one?
Yes, I know.
I'm sorry.
It's not easy.
Really, no.
I'll tell you something. Red Rose Speedway.
Yeah, go ahead.
Red Rose Speedway is an album. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. Red Rose Speedway is an album that I always liked, and now I think even more highly of it.
Yeah,
I just think that the songs
they really grew on.
melodically, I have always loved Little Lamb Dragonfly, and to this day, I think
Yes,
it's one of the
yes,
greatest songs in his solo career. Um,
absolutely.
he has that uncanny gift for writing several melodies, stringing them all together in such a way where it flows like
Right.
one piece. And you could say that about a lot of songs, Band on the Run, Uncle Albert, he has that incredible gift for that kind of thing. And Get on the Right Thing, I've always loved. Great piano driven song, which actually comes from the Ram sessions.
Okay.
Um, and so does Little M Dragonfly, for that matter. It started during Ram, but and I love the whole medley there at the end.
I
It's
like
a
it too. It grew on me. Maybe at first when I was younger, I thought it was maybe too long or little hokey or what George would have called some of his granny music. But over it,
John.
it grew on me.
Yeah,
Oh, John called it that.
yeah.
Oh, George would say it's fruity. He
Okay.
had he had a habit of saying that. But no, I really enjoy that. I think it's very well thought out,
Yep.
especially when they all come together at the end. It's like,
Brilliant.
how did you do that? How did you
Yeah.
make these seemingly four separate songs suddenly come together?
And I've grown to really appreciate when Paul goes wacky and does very experimental stuff like Loop. Loop is a
Yeah,
very interesting piece of music, much the same way as I love Krina Kror now. The stuff
yeah.
that
I
you
was like,
don't necessarily think of him as writing, but
my only trouble with Loop, and this is the one spot on the whole album. If you just took off the last minute where it seemed to have ended already,
right.
and now it's just a little bit of noise, a little bit of this. It's like, let's get to the next. You performed the song. It was really nice. It was tribal. It had the and it's great. It's like and then now it's over. And now you're waiting for the next song, but you're like, oh wait, he's still looping. Hold on. Nope, not yet. Oh, hold on, he's still looping. Ding dong dong dong. It's like, all right, come on, get to the next one. But I do enjoy the song. And Big Barn Bed is a wonderful opener. Um,
Oh
and
yeah.
one of my songs, Single Pigeon, they're all great. That Single Pigeon could have been on the White Album. And what's the other one that I love? When the Night.
When the
That's
Night, what a
that's a
piece of music there.
it really is great. I think Red Rose Speedway is the album where the Wings harmony sound really developed and came together.
Interesting.
More so it was being built up to, but on Red Rose Speedway they really nailed it as to what the Wings sound was going to be, and of course
Hmm.
that carried over into Band on the Run and Venus and Mars, and all the way up to Speed of Sound. That they incorporated that layered
Uh-huh.
harmony.
You had some of that in Wildlife,
Yes, oh
you
yeah,
know,
it
uh,
was starting. They were
you know,
developing it. Yeah,
yeah,
but I
some
think it
people
really,
never know.
I really, I knew.
Of course you
But
do.
I think, of course, I knew. On Red Rose Speedway, I think they really dove into it. I think they had the time. They must have had the time because they were going to make it a double album.
Hmm.
But I think it stands out better as the single album, personally.
Yeah. These days it kind of bothers me when people say, as they used to say in the past, he didn't make a great album until Band on the Run. Well,
Yeah,
I think time now in recent years has been much kinder to Ram and to
Ram.
Red
Ram is
Rose Speedway.
number one on any
Yeah,
list of Paul albums. Ram usually gets up to number one
yeah,
as the favorite. I mean, that's so now he did, of course, Ram's harmonies were mostly all Paul and Linda, so he did have that in mind. But I
hmm,
guess to find, yeah, so I take back, I ride back my statement a little bit because Ram had wonderful harmonies all over it, but it
sure.
wasn't the wing sound. Didn't have Denny Lane and the anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Are you more a fan of the 70s, Paul, than post?
I'm always a fan. Um, yeah, I guess it's the same with. I'm a big David Bowie fan too, but I understand why people say, yeah, but everything he did in the '70s and was much better than anything he did later. It's the same with Paul. What happened is they did this great work in the '70s, and then the '80s kind of got a little lost, in direction and maybe leaning on the current trends of the time instead of their own path. but then bounced back later, you know, like from Flowers in the Dirt on. He seemed to be himself again, you know, going back like, and the same with Bowie. I mean, when he started back in the 90s with whatever album it was now, can't remember. Hours, I think it was Hours and Heathen and all that. He got back to himself, but he got a little lost in the 80s. But I like the pre and the post output of both those artists.
Okay. Well, you know, from having spoken to me, I don't feel that way about Paul in the 80s, but because I love
You know,
Press to Play and I don't think he was lost at all, you know,
I
so.
I love Press to Play. That was on my list too. Red Rose Speedway, London Town, Press to Play, or Flaming Pie. Press to Play, I love. I think that's a great album. It irked me a little bit that Press was the single, because even though the music is cool, the lyrics are not that something that you can latch onto as a single. Same with saying, you know, My Salamander. It's always like great song, but you're really not latching on to people's emotions through these lyrics. And when you're saying Oklahoma was never like this, we go like, what? What are you talking about? Press what? You know, it's a good song melodically. You know, the song is good. I like side one very much of Press to Play. The opening, what is it? Stranglehold is the first song.
Stranglehold, yep.
Great opener. Great opener to the album. Wonderful. Talk More Talk is great. What's the other one in there?
Well,
the Sunshine In, and
Good Times
what's
Come and Feel the Sun.
Good Time. Yeah. All good
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. So if Press wasn't the single,
Yeah.
what would you have made the single? The first
I
single.
thought Stranglehold had a shot at a single. I know they tried it later, but it was too late. I thought with the right promotion, the video didn't help for Stranglehold. It didn't really. It was kind of weird. It was like, right, it was a Texas town or something, and they went in and saw him play. I thought it could have had a strong. I thought there was a strong song, Stranglehold. What would you have picked? Don't say Pretty Little Head.
It's well, they made a video for that, you know, and that became a single, actually. That's a very tough choice because, you know, I think Only Love Remains is possibly the greatest love song of his solo career. I just what's that?
That's saying a lot.
It is. I don't know. It was coming at a time when gradually Paul was getting less and less airplay on top 40 radio stations. And if you don't get the airplay to a young audience and you're only relying on the people who grew up with you, the older audience, then gradually your record sales are going to be less and less. And if any of those people don't really like change, and a lot of fans don't, they want you to, this is sounding more like my podcast shows. There are certain fans that like you to stick to your roots and the sound that made you popular from the very beginning. There are a lot of people that would prefer if Paul would sound more like he did in the 70s in terms of his production. You know, McCartney 3 is a great example of people who, because it got a great reaction critically, it's more a return to his sound as opposed to the current producer of the time working with him.
Correct.
You know, and you said, you know, latching on to trends. I think Paul likes to listen to a lot of today's music, and there are certain producers whose work he admires. So he does work with them, whether it's Hugh Padgham or, you know, David Kahn or Nigel Godrich or, you know, any of the more recent ones. Some people admire that when you try to work with other people, get input, try to sound contemporary or try to sound fresh instead of trying to rely on what worked for you before. So, you know, I see both points of view. And, you know, I'm excited to see the respect that Ram's being given and the pre-Band on the Run music. But there'll come a time when his 80s stuff and the albums that he worked on with other producers will get, I think, much more respect because I think it really deserves it. And I'm not just talking about Flaming Pie, which is more of a return to his earlier sound.
Yeah, Flaming Pie is wonderful.
And Chaos and Creation in the Backyard is a lot like that. Very simple production, closer to an early 70s sound, to me anyway. I think so.
Chaos of Creation? Isn't that the one that has
A fine line.
yeah, yeah. How Kind of You, is that on
Yep.
that one?
That's a much more layered song, but that's
Yeah,
like an
yeah.
exception on
Okay,
that
yeah. I
album.
was gonna say that. Yeah, I haven't listened to that one in a while, but yeah, yeah. No, that's a good album. I like that album. I liked a lot of his later stuff. I didn't. I'm more probably in the minority when I say I didn't love Egypt Station, mainly because of the two singles that he really. I didn't care for them that much at
Hmm.
all, especially the "For You." I'm like, really, really. But there was a lot of good stuff on it nonetheless, especially the Captain song.
The Captain song.
He's gone off the rails.
Despite repeated warnings.
That's the one.
All right, so let's talk about George.
What is there to say about George except the following words? Living in the material world.
God
Not
bless
only
you.
is it not only is it his best album, it's probably the best solo Beatle album there is. It's one of the best albums ever made, and it is my go-to album anytime. It always makes me happy. There's not a bad song on the entire thing. It's produced wonderfully. It's like you're going on a spiritual journey with George from beginning to end through pop music, and it leaves you feeling great. Even the ending of it, that is all. It says that is all, but that's not all because it ends on a cliffhanger, basically, right?
Yeah.
And that is all. And he goes dun 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 dun. It's like, where's
Yep.
where's that last? Well, because there's more. It's like that's all dot dot dot. You know, so there's more to life than just this. And actually, that's the bookends. If you think about it, even the opening track, "Give Me Love," kind of ends with a non-traditional ending.
Hmm.
It's kind of on a G7 instead of the D, or I'm sorry, it's in E. I'm talking about playing it with a capo. So in the configuration that I play it in, the song would be in the key of D, but you're ending the song on a G7 and not even strongly, but just like kind of strumming it out, jing, 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 jing. And you think that's the way he ended the album too. So he's always letting us know that even though I just gave you this message, there's more somewhere. Don't you feel that there's a little bit more somewhere? So that's for you to find, to seek out what he's been telling you. It's a great album. I know you love it, and if you want to go track by track, I will. But I don't think there's any other. The only other possible album that if I'd be in the mood for, maybe to put it on, that would get me even close to that place would be Brainwashed. I think that's a terrific album, and it ends also in a similar way, where he's basically railing against the system in the first half of Brainwashed, and you're saying, how pointing out all the atrocities, basically not atrocities, but how you're being brainwashed in this world, and then giving you an example of how to avoid that by going into this spiritual mantra at the end.
Right.
It's just so lovely, and you want it to go on longer and longer, much like the end of Ringo's Christmas album. that song, that "Peace Be With You" song, at the end you also wish that would go longer. And if I was allowed to pick compilations, that would also be my Ringo go-to album any time of year. Ringo's Christmas album, one of the best things he ever did. But back to Brainwashed, it lets us out with that wonderful mantra, and that leaves you with a great feeling also, considering all the things he was talking about on the other songs in Brainwashed. But above that, material world, and there's the hand to prove it. Living in the material world.
I knew there was a reason why you've been one of my best friends, and it has to do with living in the material world. You see it the same way as I do, because I have no problem with almost everybody that I speak to lists "All Things Must Pass," and how can you deny the greatness of "All Things Must Pass"? You talk about a great breakout album, even though George had the two albums before that, but for so many years, being held back.
Tell that to any layman.
Tell that to what?
Tell that to any layman. You go, well, George Harrison. Well, no, he had two albums before that. Oh, it's all right. It's all right.
Okay.
All Things Must Pass is a breakout album.
But he was just busting out all over with All Things Must Pass, and it isn't just the fact that it's two albums; it's two albums of great material plus the Apple Jam. So it's kind of hard to top that. but at the same time, first of all, we're talking about go-to albums, what you feel like, not necessarily what's the best.
Right.
But Living in the Material World has always touched me because of the very
Always.
spiritual songs on there. The light that has lighted the world and Who Can See It and Be Here Now are three of the greatest songs to me in his solo career.
Hmm.
And what he's saying are songs that are meaningful to him. It's kind of like I said, it's almost like his Plastic Ono Band album in a way. Certain
Mm.
songs on there are they have a very deep meaning to him. It's kind of funny though, because when you read I Me Mine, his book, and he talks about the light that has lighted the world, it was originally written for Cilla Black to record because of, yeah, it was this whole idea of local girl makes good. She's moving out of Liverpool. Now she's moving to London. All of a sudden, it's not the same anymore. And so George is kind of relating to that if you listen to the lyrics, but it fits him and his
Oh yeah.
story that he's
Oh
moving
yeah. Big
on
time.
and he's not, you know, I suppose to the world he'll always be a Beatle and a Beatle first, but he's moved on.
Right.
And that's what you get in a song like that. And it isn't just how great the song is, the way that it's arranged. It's very simply arranged, and the piano playing from Nicky Hopkins is just he's not
You're talking about
overdoing anything. It's just
the light that has
perfect.
lighted the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's one of
Um,
my favorites. I love playing it. I love singing it. It's that and it touches people and it's a wonderful message. And like you
right.
say, Nicky Hopkins is like one of the all-stars on that album. His piano playing really moves me on a lot of the Who Can See It.
Yep.
Oh,
I know.
and yeah.
Thing about a
It-
lot
it-
of George's stuff, especially the stuff that's really heavy and very personal, I have a tough time making that the album that you want to hear in the car. Because usually when you're in the car, you want to rock out a bit. You want things to be
uh-huh.
light, you know, keep your mind on the
Yeah.
road, not something where somebody's saying something so deep, you know.
You-
Plastic Ono Band is not an album that I want to hear in the car. It's an album that I want to hear in my room or with the headphones on. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And in some ways, Living in the Material World can be that for me, but I still love the song so much that,
Um,
yeah,
I, I just as a matter of fact, yes, I've listened to it in headphones. I listened to it in my room, but I have many times put "Living in the Material World" on in the car when we're traveling.
okay.
My wife and I, we love it, and it soothes us both. It's like, put on, blast it.
Mm,
It's great stuff. You're saying like All Things Must Pass. He had all this stuff, and he was going in all different directions. It's like trying to corral, all these songs onto one album when
right.
they're all different. Material World is like laser focused. Like
Mm,
it seems like the whole thing is streamlined as to one piece, even if the songs weren't written that way or came out of like the Ronnie Spector song that I don't think he was supposed to do, Buy Some Try Some. I don't or Try
try
Some
some
Buy Some.
bison.
Um, Try Some Bison. Try Some Bison. um, but I don't know if that was initially meant for this album, but it just all pieces together wonderfully as one linear piece, almost like Walls and Bridges does. We were talking about the production of that earlier and how the whole album just seems to just flow.
Mm.
That's Material World, both
Very
sides.
interesting. Very interesting. I never thought about that. All Things Must Pass musically has a lot of different genres in there. There's country music, there's folk
Mhm.
music with Apple Scruffs, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it is much more focused, Material World is. So yeah, but it's a marvelous album. And to me, it's my favorite album of all time from any artist. And I'm glad to know I'm not the only person in the world that feels that way. So
Not at all. Not at all.
yeah,
Of course, if there was another album to throw up there, just to, if it wasn't George Harrison from 1979, that
yeah,
album, that's a nice driving song, driving album.
it
Pop
is.
that. Anyway, but we don't have to get into that. This Material World is it. So when it all come down, if I wasn't allowed to pick Starstruck, it would be Choose Love. I'm going with Red Rose Speedway over London Town. Going with Mind Games. Sticking with Material World. And the
And the
Beatles
British
second
Rubber
album.
Soul. Oh, the second album.
No,
Okay.
I'll go with the British Rubber Soul over Beatles second album. But if you really want to, if you want an injection of high energy Beatles, put on the Beatles second album, top to bottom. You'll just be giddy.
It's funny, you know, I grew up on the American albums like you did, but ever since 1987, when the CDs came out and we heard everything as the British albums, I rarely go back to the American. Maybe I should once in a while, you know.
They're interesting. I had we have the little box sets, the volume 1 and volume 2. Was there supposed to be a volume 3 with like Yesterday and Today in it? Because that never got re-released. You know what I'm talking
I don't
about?
remember. Yeah, I remember.
Apple albums.
Yeah, I know there were
Yeah.
the two, but I'm not sure
So
about that.
there's no Yesterday and Today, and there's no American version of Rubbers of Revolver. Which right takes off those. That's all they do is just take off the 3 songs. But
Right.
or the Beatles Story. Where's the Beatles Story?
Do we really need that?
I remember getting that for Christmas as a kid. Trying to collect complete my Beatles collection, where I'm about 13 years old. And the Beatles have been broken up for a few years, but I got to get the Beatles Story. I think I listened to it once. I was like, okay, put it in the collection. Just
And
leave
how
it
many
there.
times? And yeah, I listened to it a few times, and after that, never again.
Oh well, they got our money.
All right. So before we go, I'm going to include in our description box your website for people who want to learn more about you and possibly
Yeah,
buy
the
your
website
CDs.
is very outdated, and there's really not a lot of current information on it. I just let it last, but the calendar is always updated. This tells you where I'm going to play. But you
Right.
can always find me on Facebook. Facebook is the place to find the most updated performances, schedules, and I'm still doing these live stream shows once a week for those who made friends with during the pandemic. And I can't let them. I can't quit them. I just can't quit them, Ken. So we're still in touch doing live streams. Ed Ryan, check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, we should say that when the pandemic hit, you started doing 3 shows a week, Monday,
week.
Wednesday, and Friday, usually starting around 3 or 3 o'clock musicians time.
Yeah, exactly. 3:15, 3:20, 3:30.
And we're not talking about half an hour here. I mean, you put on two and
2
a
to
half
3
hours.
hours.
Yeah.
A lot of times goes 3 hours. I always have a theme like yourself. That every show has been different. I've done many different Beatles themes, all different. What do we do? It started in March. We just did our 230th show. What's today? Friday, 2 days ago. We did our 230th in 2 years. That's what it used to be 3 times a week, but then as things opened up, we scaled back to once a week just to stay in touch with all the wonderful people we've met, not just in the States, but we have people watching us in New Zealand and not Finland, Norway, and Argentina. It's been a lot. It's been a kick. So yeah, check it out. I always have a different theme. I just stand there and play my songs, put it together. I learned from the best, Ken.
I was going to say, some of your themes sound very familiar to me. I don't know where you get them from, Ed.
Well, 230. They're not all Beatles though.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love all the themes that you do. And when you do put on Beatles shows, and they're usually something different, you did a really great George Harrison birthday one.
Yeah, just
recently.
It was the first time I decided not to do any Beatles songs for him. Every time you put a George show together, you have to include the classic Beatles songs. But I'm like, we just did a tribute to him in November for the 20th anniversary of his passing. So now it's February. It's only a couple of months later. Am I going to rehash the same stuff? So I only did just solo stuff. And that was really fun for me and hopefully educational for those who don't know the material.
Yeah.
Because that's another plus side to doing these shows is you're not just singing the same songs that everyone already knows. Maybe
Right.
educating, fortifying their minds with new edification.
It's kind of like, what I try to do in every little thing and what I've been doing.
And I always learn something new. Every show you do at least one thing, either it's a song I haven't heard or just a little fact or something. I'll go, well, I didn't know that before, or I forgot that I knew it. But you always put something in there.
Well, that's
George
what I
gets
try
the
to do. Yeah,
Yeah,
what's that?
George gets the short shrift. Let's talk about that for a second. George gets the short shrift when it comes to collective and honoring him. So I was very happy to put 30 songs together from just his solo career that were not all just the hits. I didn't have to play the hits. He's the only one that hasn't had what I'm consider a proper and true greatest hits collection. There was that one Let It Roll they tried. It was one disc
Uh-huh.
and included the 3 Beatles songs from Bangladesh. For what purpose? For no
Right.
purpose whatsoever. Should have been a 2-disc set and just all the really, really great stuff from his albums. If you want to put anything from Bangladesh, put a live version of Bangladesh or
Hmm.
Beware of Darkness, instead of the album version, and include that in his greatest hit package. Only John Lennon has got the best, greatest, the one Working Class Hero is like a
Right.
wonderful 2-disc collection
I'm glad
of
you mentioned that because I love that collection.
that is, I think, the best collection of anyone of the Beatles. They got it right. They almost got Photograph right. I think Ringo's 20-disc set would be near perfect if you just swapped out "Hey Baby," which is not really a hit for him,
Uh,
for La Di Da. Why was La Di Da not on that collection? That should have definitely been on there. If you did that, then that would say that's a great collection. Wingspan, very close. I think that the closest Paul got to a really great collection would be Wingspan, but don't give me radio edits. I don't want the
yeah,
short version of Venus and Mars Rock Show. I don't want the short version of With a Little Luck.
I
That
agree.
was nearly perfect, but not. John Lennon's the only one so far that's got a perfect 2-disc collection. So let's get
Okay.
George.
I think that for one disc, Photograph is a really good collection. Although
Yes.
I've never been a big fan of Hey Baby, so I agree with you there.
Oh, take Hey Baby out and La Di Da should have been up there. That's
Hmm.
at the time. They didn't have the other albums he's made since then. So for that collection, that one swap would have made it.
And definitely for all the incredible material that Paul has done, he's never had a really decent greatest hits.
Even
Yeah.
I just pulled out the other that I saw, the Pure McCartney, that 4-disc
Uh-huh.
set. It's. I mean, of course, I like all the songs, but that's not the definitive collection either.
Okay. Well, you ask 100 different McCartney fans what they would put together, and you get 100 different answers. That's the
Yep.
thing. But when you're dealing with a catalog that rich, you can't accomplish much with 1 or 2 discs. It's
No.
got to be several, and you got to include hits. You got to include really good album cuts, and everyone's got a different opinion as to what his best stuff is. So,
I would have been very happy with Wingspan if they just given the full versions of every song.
Hmm.
Of course, there were things missing from it that could have been on it, but again, you need a 3rd disc of Wingspan. But then that's I'm sorry, then that stops in 1980, doesn't it, or 82? All right, so that
84.
we're really not 83, so we're really not getting the whole. I see. All right, so it was a nice start, and then 2 more discs for everything after that.
I love, the wordplay with Wingspan, but if you're talking about anything that's before Wildlife, that's not a Wing song. If you
Correct.
talk about
Yeah,
anything after Back to the Egg and Coming Up, the live version,
right.
it's
It's
not
not
Wings.
Wings.
You
Yeah,
know,
there was a little bit of cheating. I think it was more like him and Linda. Oh, but then no, that doesn't ring true either, because she was playing with them all the way up through Off the Ground. So, what are we going to do with this, Ken?
I don't know. They need minds like us.
Oh yeah, Norton. Now you cut up money to see if it'll fit in the suitcase, and then we'll go show it to McCartney. See what he thinks.
Another big Honeymooners fan here on this show.
It's,
To go along with Joe Mayo at Talk More Talk and Darren DeVivo on things we said today. But yeah, by all means, check out the live concerts that Ed does every single Wednesday around 3:00 Eastern time.
they're getting better on time.
Yeah, and thank you for being here. And
my pleasure. Congratulations on 40 years of wonderful. What is it you do?
I'm still trying to figure it out. One of these days I'll perfect it. I don't know.
Well,
But
you're my favorite. Anyway, I listen to a lot of the Beatles shows, and you're my favorite. And I really like Terry, the one from Chicago. How do you pronounce her last name? Terry Emmert.
Hemmert.
Hemmert, I'm sorry. She's
Yeah.
got a very sweet way about her too. But you're my fave.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're my
And
go-to. If I had to pick a go-to broadcaster on this,
okay.
it's the Fab Six. Pick Ken Michaels.
This has been as fab as could be here, having you here on the show, and come back whenever you want to.
Anytime.
It could be just like it was in the old days, but just a little bit older.
We look the same.
Yeah, right. Thanks for
Well,
being there
I've been-
40 years ago and all the years since then with you.
My pleasure, Ken. Love you. Love your family. Say hello to everybody. And I've been waiting to say this. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Love you too, and Rain. And thanks to all of our listeners. We'll see you soon. Take care.